A man accused of killing his former wife. This happened less than a week ago at her home in Hayward.
The senseless thing happen can shatter a family.
Lorenzo Smith is mourning the loss of his niece, Monique Aldridge of Hayward. Her family is struggling with her sudden death, the victim of gun violence.
Thank you to everyone watching, and a special thank you to our subscribers. Your support means everything. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. Here at Unmasked True Crime Stories, we're committed to telling the stories that matter with respect and truth. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Your support helps us keep uncovering the truth. Now, let's get back to the story.
Police say the 5-year-old son Aldridge and the suspect shared was at home at the time of the shooting, but relatives say the child did not witness what happened.
She had dreams, a future, a child growing inside her. Monique Aldridge was more than just a name in a headline. She was a mother, a daughter, a woman fighting for a better life. But in the shadows of her own home, terror was closing in. For years, she had endured the storms of a love that wasn't love at all. Vaughn Boatner had promised her forever, but what he gave her instead was fear. His hands weren't those of a protector. His words weren't those of a man who cared. And on that May evening, as the sun set over Hayward, California, Monique's story was rewritten in blood. Inside her home on Cassia Drive, there was no warning, no final chance to run. A gun was raised, a trigger was pulled, and the life of a mother and her unborn child was stolen in an instant. But the bullets that ended her story weren't just fired in a moment of rage. They were the culmination of years of control, obsession, and the kind of danger that too many women know too well. As her body lay still, her 5-year-old son was left standing in the aftermath, a witness to something no child should ever have to see. The echoes of the gunfire, the silence that followed. It was the sound of a family being torn apart. And as the sirens filled the night, as neighbors stood frozen in horror, the man responsible was nowhere to be found. Vaughn Boatner vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a shattered home, a grieving family, and a community desperate for justice. What drove him to this moment? What warning signs had been ignored? And how did a mother, fighting for her own safety, end up as another statistic? Another woman whose cries for help went unheard until it was too late. The search for a killer had begun. But the real story. Monique Aldridge wasn't just a name in a tragic story. She was a mother, a daughter, a woman full of life and love. She had a future she was fighting for, a future that was stolen in an instant. She was strong, both in spirit and in body. A fitness coach dedicated to helping others find their strength, pushing them to believe in themselves the way she had learned to believe in herself. She had fought through struggles, had rebuilt herself, had dared to dream of something better, and for a while it seemed like she was finally stepping into the life she deserved. But behind the walls of her home, behind the bright smile captured in family photos, was a truth far more painful. A truth she carried with her every day. Vaughn Boatner had once been the man she loved, the father of her son. But love, real love, doesn't come with fear. It doesn't leave bruises, seen or unseen. It doesn't make a woman question whether she'll make it to tomorrow. And yet, that's exactly what Monique lived with. Their relationship was a cycle: love, control, regret, and then the same painful dance all over again. But Monique was done dancing. She had made the choice to move on, to step out of the shadow Vaughn had cast over her life. And for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. She had a new love, a fresh start, a baby on the way. But some people don't let go easily. Some people see moving on as a threat. Some people refuse to accept that they no longer have control. Vaughn Boatner wasn't just angry. He wasn't just bitter. He was dangerous. And on May 11, 2023, the danger became reality. It's 9:15 p.m. The night air hangs heavy in Hayward, California. On Cassia Drive, a quiet street nestled in a suburban neighborhood, something horrific is about to unfold. Monique Aldridge, her 5-year-old son, and her boyfriend are inside the house. For them, it should have been just another evening, another night in a life that had been hard, a life that had been hard-earned, a life that was starting to look up again. But outside, a storm was brewing, one that would tear their world apart. Vaughn Boatner, Monique's ex-husband, the father of her son, had arrived at her doorstep. And this time, he wasn't the man she had once trusted. This time, he was armed. He knocked on the door, his arrival nothing out of the ordinary. But once Monique opened it, the air between them would never be the same again. It was the moment that would forever change their lives. Vaughn Boatner's rage exploded without warning. He pulled out a gun, the sharp crack of gunfire shattering the silence of that night. Monique was struck multiple times, her body falling to the ground, lifeless. Her boyfriend, who tried to protect her, was shot as well. But luck was on his side. He survived, though the scars of that night would remain with him forever. Monique's 5-year-old son, too young to understand the depth of what was happening, was caught in the chaos. The child's world, his innocence, was stolen in an instant. He watched as the man who once helped bring him into this world, his own father, took away the woman who had given him life. The sound of gunfire echoed through the walls, bouncing off the rooms that had once held laughter, love, and dreams of the future. Now, those walls held nothing but blood and fear. And when the screams faded, when the echoes of horror finally died away, all that was left was the sound of a phone, dialing, and a desperate voice on the other end of the line. 911. What's your emergency? Frantic, a woman gasping for air, a voice trembling with fear. He shot her. He shot her. Please hurry. The urgency in the voice, the terror that poured through the line, was like nothing that could ever be truly understood. The paramedics arrived moments later, but it was too late. Monique Aldridge was gone. Her life, her hopes for a brighter future, all erased in the blink of an eye. And as the flashing lights of police vehicles illuminated the street, as detectives arrived on the scene, one question rang through the minds of everyone who heard the news. Who would do this? Who could commit such an act of violence? Vaughn Boatner had vanished into the night, gone without a trace. A mother silenced, a child left without his mother, and a murderer on the loose. The investigation would begin. But the pieces of the puzzle weren't so easily put together. The story was just beginning, and the truth would be harder to uncover than anyone could have anticipated. The night Monique Aldridge's life was taken was just the beginning of a hunt that would stretch across state lines, testing the patience and resolve of law enforcement officials. For 11 days, Vaughn Boatner remained on the run, a shadow, evading justice. But for every second, he thought he was free. The walls of the law were closing in. As the search for Boatner began, it wasn't just a matter of finding a fugitive. It was about uncovering the truth, a truth that would make this case even more tragic than it already was. A fugitive, yes, but a man with a dark past, a man who had built his life on manipulation and violence. U.S. Marshals, local authorities, and FBI agents launched a nationwide manhunt. Boatner's every move was being tracked. His whereabouts were a mystery, but investigators were relentless. No detail was too small, no lead too insignificant. From California to Nevada to the far reaches of the Pacific Northwest, the authorities scoured every corner for a trace, for anything that could point them to him. For days, the clock ticked. Each hour that passed felt like a step closer to the inevitable conclusion. And then, on May 22, 2023, after 11 long days, it happened. The search ended in Seattle, Washington. It was there, in a city far from the scene of his crime, that Vaughn Boatner was captured. The chase had come to an end, but it didn't erase the pain or the fear that had been left behind. When Boatner was taken into custody, the questions began. How had he managed to stay hidden for so long? And what secrets did he still hold? The answers were only beginning to unravel. Boatner's past was one of violence. A convicted felon, he had no business owning a firearm. But that didn't stop him. The gun he used to take Monique's life was never registered to him, a violation that made the crime even more grievous. It wasn't just the murder of a woman, the loss of a mother. It was the murder of a woman carrying a child, a life taken before it even had the chance to begin. Monique Aldridge wasn't just any victim. She was a mother, and she was pregnant. Vaughn Boatner's crime was not just about a woman he had once loved, a woman he had once loved, a woman he had once called his own. This was a crime against two lives, two futures destroyed in a flash of rage. And as the days passed, the weight of that fact would press harder and harder on the case. Justice, for now, was catching up with Vaughn Boatner. But for Monique's family, justice would never undo the devastation they'd endured. Would the legal system be able to hold him accountable for everything he had taken from them? Could anything repair the damage he had caused? As authorities prepared to bring him to trial, one thing was clear: the story was far from over. The pain Monique's family carried with them would haunt them forever, but the truth, the full, unflinching truth, was finally starting to surface. Vaughn Boatner couldn't hide forever. Justice was finally catching up to Vaughn Boatner. But would it be enough? The courtroom was quiet, the weight of what was unfolding, pressing heavily on everyone inside. For Monique Aldridge's family, for the people who knew her, this moment, the trial, was the culmination of weeks of waiting, of wondering what justice would look like for the life lost too soon. Vaughn Boatner sat in front of the judge, facing a long list of charges: murder, attempted murder, child endangerment, and the illegal possession of a firearm. Each charge telling its own story of violence, of destruction. Monique Aldridge wasn't just a victim in this case. She was a mother, a woman who had trusted the man sitting across from her family. And now the law had to decide what would become of him. Prosecutors argued that this wasn't a crime of passion, not a sudden burst of anger. No. This was cold, calculated, premeditated. Vaughn Boatner had gone to Monique's house that night with intent. He had armed himself knowing what he planned to do. He shot Monique multiple times and left her, boyfriend, fighting for his life. Worst of all, he did it with their son in the house, a child who witnessed the horror unfold. For Monique's family, the terror that had already broken their hearts was now being forced into the open, like a wound that could never heal. But Boatner's defense had another angle. They claimed it had been a moment of passion, a heated argument that led to an uncontrollable outburst of violence. But the evidence told a different story. There was no evidence of a struggle, no sign that this was an impulsive act. The murder weapon had been carefully handled. The plan to hurt Monique, to end her life, seemed to have been deliberate, and with each piece of evidence presented, the defense's argument seemed less and less convincing. With each witness testimony, each piece of evidence laid out before the court, it became clear. Vaughn Boatner had planned this. He had executed it with brutal precision. His actions weren't those of a man overcome by emotion, but of someone who had already decided that Monique Aldridge's life, future, and the future of the child she carried meant nothing to him. For the family, the pain was raw. Their voices quivered, their faces tight with the emotional toll of reliving what happened that night. Every word, every piece of evidence felt like another strike, another reminder of the mother, the woman who was gone, the woman who had trusted the wrong person. The woman who had given everything for her son, and whose life was stolen from her in a moment of rage and control. And as the prosecution laid out their final argument, the question remained, what would happen next? With overwhelming evidence stacked against him, Vaughn Boatner had nowhere to hide. The fate of a man who had stolen so much from so many hung in the balance. In that moment, the courtroom held its breath. The family waited. Justice for Monique Aldridge had to come. But as the gavel came down, would it be enough to make them whole again? The trial had reached its peak, but what came next would define not just Vaughn Boatner's fate, but the fate of everyone whose lives had been touched by his violence. Would the legal system bring justice to Monique's family, or would they be left to search for answers in the silence of a courtroom that was about to deliver its verdict? With overwhelming evidence, Boatner had only one fate left. The night was still, but the grief was palpable. In the days and weeks that followed the tragic events of May 11, 2023, Monique Aldridge's family and community were left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. A life that had been full of promise, full of hope, and yet, in an instant, was extinguished by violence. A young child was left without a mother. A child who would never again feel the warmth of her embrace or hear the soothing words only a mother could offer. The world was forever changed for him. His childhood marred by the horrors of what he had witnessed, a lifetime of memories stolen before they could even begin. For the community, the shock was overwhelming. Hayward had always been a place of comfort for many, a place where people came together, and yet, on this fateful night, a veil of sorrow settled over the streets. Monique was known to so many as a caring mother, a friend, a coach, someone who worked tirelessly to better herself and others around her. But that night, everything was stolen from her. Her life, her future, her dreams. And in the wake of her loss, there was only grief. At candlelight vigils, friends and family gathered in silence, holding their breath as they remembered the woman who had given so much to those around her. They grieved not only for the life lost, but for the future that had been stolen. Monique's unborn child, a life that never had the chance to grow, to experience the world. The sadness was felt in every corner of the community as the truth sank in. Domestic violence had claimed another victim. A cycle that many had hoped could be broken had, instead, claimed another life. Monique's story, though tragic, was a painful reminder that behind closed doors, the danger was real. And for some, love could be a lie, a mask for control, for manipulation, for cruelty. No mother should ever have to fear for her life in her own home. No child should be forced to witness such horror, but Monique Aldridge's story serves as a heartbreaking reminder that for some, the relationship they trust and believe in will one day turn deadly. Domestic violence doesn't always look like what we expect. It hides in plain sight, in relationships that appear normal to the outside world, in families that seem perfect. But when it turns, it can shatter lives in an instant. Monique's family, her friends, and her community will never be the same again. The pain of losing her, of seeing her life taken so violently, will linger long after the courtrooms have quieted and the headlines fade. But perhaps, in the tragedy, there is a lesson that will echo through the years. No one should ever be afraid to speak out. No one should ever let abuse go unnoticed. For Monique Aldridge, the world lost a bright light. For her son, for her family, there will never be a true closure. But perhaps, with time, they will find peace. In the midst of pain, in the midst of sorrow, they will always remember the love that Monique gave. And so, her story lives on, not in the horror of that night, but in the lessons learned, in the hearts that carry her memory forward. Monique Aldridge's legacy will never be forgotten. As we reflect on the tragic story of Monique Aldridge and the life lost that night, the question remains: Do we ever truly see the darkness until it's too late? Could something have been done? Could the signs have been noticed earlier? We may never have all the answers, but one thing is clear: this case is far from over. We all have a role to play in breaking the cycle of violence. Monique's death, her son's trauma, and the ripple effect on her community serve as painful reminders of what happens when abuse goes unrecognized or ignored. The question now is, what will we do to ensure this doesn't happen again? Do you think justice was served in this case? Was the sentence enough to truly hold Vaughn Boatner accountable for the lives he shattered? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, remember, help is available. You're not alone. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-7233. Together, we can make a difference. For more real crime stories that uncover the truth, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We bring you new cases every week, stories that need to be heard and voices that need to be remembered. Thank you for watching. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and together we can keep shining a light on the darkest corners of society.